So welcome everybody to Red Suit Interviews, and we are joined by Labor's Lord Mayoral candidate, Patrick Condren. How are we today?
Very well, Ryan. Thank you for having me. I want to pop out of that suit. It's very bright. I tell you what, you wouldn't want to be hungover. You'd end up with a
No, there's
with
been
a
too many
headache.
times. For those who are listening, because there's a lot of young people out there that aren't familiar with local politics,
Yes.
let alone even television news nowadays. So can you give just a brief background of who you are and what you do?
Sure. Presently, I'm the Labor's Lord Mayoral candidate for the forthcoming council elections in Brisbane. That they're on March the 28th. And if you're going to, if you're eligible to vote, you should enrol ASAP so you can get your vote in and make your vote count. I think when you were seeing a whole lot of things around the world that are happening, it's important that in a democracy like Australia that you have a say. But my background is for the past 20 years, I suppose. I was the political editor at Channel 7 here in Brisbane, or in Brisbane. I realise we're in Ipswich now. So I've come outside the boundaries to talk to you, which I didn't need a passport, which is good.
Yeah.
So I spent 20 years keeping politicians, holding politicians to account. I covered about 6 state elections and a couple of federal elections. Which was an exciting time, but I've never previously been on this side of the microphone.
Yeah.
I was always on your side of the microphone asking questions. During that time, I had a bit of a stint at 4BC, presenting a morning program there for a couple of years, which was great fun. I absolutely love radio. I think it's the medium of the past that is now more relevant than ever in the present. Not too often these days you get to do these sorts of long form interviews where you can really explore issues and explores people's backgrounds. So I absolutely love radio. Before that, before I came to Channel 7, I was, my wife Margaret and I spent 6 years in the UK, and I worked for the BBC there and ITV and freelanced for newspapers like The Australian and the Courier Mail. And before that, Tassie for 7:30 Report and ABC TV News, and then before that, Brisbane. So I've been around the world. Journalism has taken me around the world, quite literally, which is fantastic. But now I've settled in good old Brisbane. We've been here since the end of 2002. I've got 2 kids.
Long time now.
It is a fairly long time ago. In your language, it's not so long ago in my language. I've got a wife, Margaret, who is the rock of our family. She's a paediatric oncologist at the Royal Children's Hospital, or at the Children's Hospital in South Brisbane. And I've got a daughter who is studying at university. She's studying at UQ, biomedical science. And I've got a son, Finbar, who is 17, but he's the same age we would have been when we finished school. So he's the first cohort of experimental kids. He was the first preppy, and he was the first grade 7 into high school. And now he's going to be the first ATAR, so it's a brave new world.
Oh, yeah.
So that's me in a nutshell. I suppose I've crossed a few dry gullies, as they like to say, and I've sort of reached a point in my life where the opportunity to do something positive for our community, it happened at the right time. They came to me. I'd never previously had any desire, any urge to be a politician or to be an aspiring politician. I'm a long way from being a politician at the moment, but the opportunity presented itself, and I had a conversation with my family. And we decided it was the opportunity to do some good. So we've grabbed it with both hands, and we're getting to the pointy end of the campaign now. So it's up at 4:30 to read the media and see if I manage to make it into the media. And then we have various conference calls, and then we're on the campaign. So this morning I was out at Toombul bus interchange in the rain, talking to some folk, and then I drove out here.
Oh, well, that's a big story.
Yeah, it's a big story, yes.
Well, one of the things, so I've had the very brief experience I've had surrounding politics. I couldn't think of anything worse to get into with the infighting, the mess, just the bureaucracy with it all. And for someone who spent as many years that you've had, just at Channel 7, let alone everywhere else, you should know probably better than most people in the world that politics is a bit of a disaster.
Well, yeah, go on. You finish your question.
Yeah, so what was the reason for you to then spur into politics? What was the reason that sort of motivated you to get into it then?
I think because I've never been a politician, and throughout my political reporting career, I've always maintained that politics should not be a career. The major parties have turned politics into a career for people. They get them at university or they get them very young and they bring them up through the ranks and then they turn them out fully formed. Adrian Schrinner's a perfect example of that. He's been he worked in Peter Dutton's office, so he's a career politician. What I bring to it is fresh eyes. So I've spent a lifetime, I've had a career as a political journalist holding politicians to account. Um, and I think it was that sort of ability to see from the outside in to realise there's some significant issues at Brisbane City Council. And that prompted me to stick my hand up because I know I can do some good. It's, I suppose, it's a third career for me. I spent the first part of my working life digging holes in the ground for telecom in central Queensland. So I've got a bit of dirt under my fingernails, and then I got into journalism for the majority of my working life, and now I see it as an opportunity to get in for a couple of terms and make a difference, do some real good for people out there. I know at the moment there's an issue kicking around in Brisbane about footpath repairs. You know, one of the first things I said was I will freeze the Lord Mayoral's salary and use any indexed increases and put that towards fixing footpaths because it might not sound like a big thing, but for example, if you're disabled in some way, shape or form, if you're in a wheelchair, for example, if you've got a broken leg, if you're a kid walking to school or a parent walking kids to school and you come across a broken footpath, you could trip, it can impede your journey. And, so for some people, it's important to be able to get out and interact in their community. So, I mean, it doesn't sound like a huge thing, but it's, I suppose, an opportunity for me to give back as well. I think when you reach the ripe old age of 57, you're looking for things to do to make a difference. And I think this is an opportunity for me to do that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Mm.
So why with Labor? Like, what about that sort of initially goes, yes, I want to run with Labor? Because obviously you've seen both parties, you've seen the goods and the bads from both parties. So what ultimately spurred you on to go, yes, I'll go with Labor rather than independent or third party?
I think my parents certainly instilled in me a lot of Labor values. Those, working for the community, doing the right thing for the community, in it for the community, not in it for myself, and being able to help people. And they're really traditional Labor values. Getting out into those suburbs. For example, Callum Vale in Brisbane doesn't have a library. It's 2020 and it doesn't have a library. We're sitting here, we've got cameras on us, we've got all the technology around us, we've got our mobile phones, all that sort of business. And you've got a community like Callum Vale that does not have a library. And I think that is extraordinary. And one of the things we will do is obviously look at putting something like that facility into that particular community. And it's one of the forgotten suburbs. The LNP are quite CBD centric. I doubt that you'd get them out to Springfield to talk to you.
Well, I've gone into contact with them so far.
Well, we'll see what happens.
There's been obviously I want to try and get both sides.
Sure,
Thing.
Absolutely, and that's admirable from a journalistic perspective. But up at Deagon in the Brighton foreshore, that hasn't been upgraded for many years, and that's an area that a lot of people in Brisbane go for a weekend. They might go up for the day to have some fish and chips on the seashore. And that's an area that's in great need. Bracken Ridge, those sorts of parts of the world, those outer suburbs that have been ignored for too long by the LNP.
So, obviously, you've sort of got a major focus on local. Were you initially curious about going into other politics in terms of like state and federal, or have you always had your eyes set on local?
I have never had my eyes set on any politics at all. As I say, I suppose it was like a perfect storm. We're in a position in our lives at the moment where, we've worked hard. My daughter's at university, my son's in grade 12 at school. So I've got the time to be able to dedicate to this job 110%, which is what I'm doing. So, both the major parties actually approached me at different times during my time in covering state politics. And I always eschewed them. I always said, no thanks. I'd rather be on the outside of the tent, looking in rather than the inside looking out. So I have never had any political aspirations. At the middle of last year, I was asked to help draft a budget reply speech for the Labor Party in council, which is where I got to see this LNP administration up close and personal. And it's extraordinary what they are doing. I think a lot of the students out there would be appalled to find out that the Lord Mayor gets $100,000 on top of his $260,000 salary. He gets another $100,000 paid directly into his bank account that he doesn't have to account for. So he doesn't have to produce a receipt. He can spend it in any way, shape or form. So if there was a library at Callan Vale and if there was a librarian who went out at lunchtime to buy a carton of milk for the co-workers to have a cup of tea at lunchtime, she'd have to produce a receipt if she wanted to, claim that carton of milk back. But the Lord Mayor can go down to the BMW dealership in the Valley and buy himself a brand new car, and he doesn't have to tell anyone, doesn't have to produce a receipt. And that's the sort of inequity in the system that I think that really drew me into this particular contest. And I think that's appalling that they should be allowed to do that. And he had an opportunity to give up that 100,000 late last year, and he squibbed it. He was given that opportunity in the chamber, and he just absolutely squibbed it. He decided to keep it for himself. When you're out and about and you're talking to people who are struggling with their rates, for example, I think that sort of behaviour is appalling, and that was one of the motivations that got me into it. So, I suppose the short answer to your question is, I've never previously had any political aspirations, state or federal, but I think at the local level, it's the level of government that is most in touch with the community. It's the level of government that can do the most good for the local community.
Yeah, and especially touching on there about how you perceive, especially the current Liberal or LNP government.
Well, LNP administration.
Yeah, LNP administration. Would you say that's one of your main motivating factors for getting into it? Into trying to run for Lord Mayor?
My main motivating factor is to stop the rorts over the last 16 years. So a bit of a history lesson, I suppose. So each of the chairs of the various committees get $20,000 each. So that's about $260,000 a year. So over 16 years, you can do the math. So it's over $4 million that they've pocketed. And I think that money would be better spent. If you live in the Brisbane precinct at the moment, you are getting bombarded with, brochures promoting the LNP, all paid for by the ratepayers. So that's another $6 million. So if you look at all that in combined, that's $10 million that they are using to keep their snouts in the trough and pocketing in terms of residents and ratepayers' money. So that's the motivating factor. Can you imagine what you could spend with $10 million? Certainly Callan Vale would get a new library. You could get a new red suit.
I get a few red suits.
You could get a red suit for
we
every
could all
day.
get red suits.
You could get a red suit for every day ending in Y. That's the motivating factor. So redistributing that money that the LNP are using to line their own pockets, redistributing that to the communities that absolutely need them. And that's my motivating factor.
Okay. Now, as much as we don't want to say it because it's a bit scary, but there is obviously a chance that Liberal or the LNP could win this election.
Absolutely. And,
yeah.
and I take your point. I mean, they've got incumbency. For example, the Lord Mayor's got 5 media staff in his office at a cost of $2 million to the ratepayers. And I'm here by myself talking to you. So if I'm worth 5, well, that's all well and good, but I'm not getting anywhere.
Hopefully I can sell this footage then for a bit more than that. So, but would you still consider going into politics and staying into politics if you don't get elected for this run?
No, I'm done after this. If in the unlikely event that I miss out, this is my one shot in the locker, and I'll give it everything, absolutely everything. I won't leave anything in the tank. I will be absolutely 110% knackered on March the 28th when the vote is held. And we've got some good ideas that we need to prosecute between now and then. But at the moment, that's it. I will give it my best go. And if I'm not successful, I'll ride off into the sunset and give someone else a go. I think that's the way politics should be. You should get in, have a crack for a couple of terms, and then get back out. It shouldn't be a career. I've got no aspirations beyond this. I don't know that my family would allow me to. It's while we've been sort of chugging along at the moment, people are starting to be engaged. So, I'm up and out and on conference calls, and I won't be home until 8 o'clock tonight. And that's just driving back from Springfield. Kidding.
Yeah. Take the train. It's way
Take the
faster.
train,
Yeah.
yes, exactly. Unfortunately, the train doesn't go necessarily where I need to go.
That's true.
One thing I have promised while we're talking about public transport is if I am lucky enough to be elected, is to ride my bike around the city to get to meetings. And people, people might say, well, that doesn't mean much, but it sets an example. And I think as people in the public eye, as politicians in the public eye, it's all about a lot of it's about setting an example. And if I can ride my bike to meetings, why can't other people ride their bikes to meetings?
Oh, that's a good example. Hopefully there's no controversy around Patrick Condren spends $40,000 on new bike.
No, I've got a few bikes at home, much to Margaret's chagrin, but yes, no, I'll use one of my own treadlies.
Yeah. And you're touching on there, especially with your family involved in this. How is it now being on the other aisle of the political side now, or not the aisle?
The other side of it.
Yeah, the other side.
I hear what you're saying. Look, it's been an interesting experience, and I think one of the things that has highlighted is it's a lot easier on your side. When you're asking the questions, it's a lot easier on that side than it is on this side. And I've made, I've made some blues. Said the wrong thing occasionally, which then becomes the story. And I would have done exactly the same thing if I was in that position. The LNP have turned it into a meme. Good luck to them. But it is the most invigorated I've been professionally for many a long year. And I think what it highlights, what it shows is that I'm not a career politician. I'm not a polished career politician. I'm a bloke that's had another life, who's been given this fantastic opportunity to make a difference, and I've grabbed it with both hands. And I think, that style of gotcha journalism, which I practiced with gusto, absolute gusto. I think that style of gotcha political coverage, I think the punters are sick of it. I genuinely think they're sick of it. And I was out, I was out this morning at Toombul, as I say, and talking to people, and they all wanted to stop and have a chat about different things. So I'm heartened by that, I suppose. But I think, it's not easy. But we've got some good ideas coming up. We've got a great suite of policies that we're going to announce a little bit closer to the election date. And one of the things that I bring after 30 years plus in broadcast journalism is being able to tell a story, is being able to explain to people and to bring people with us. There's no point getting into politics if you're not going to take the voters and the community with you. So we've got some great ideas that I'll enlarge upon further down the track, which I'm looking forward to. One thing I have, not leaving aside the journalism side of things and switching to this side, one thing I am enjoying enormously is the policy development side of things.
So for your campaign, what would be the major policies that your administration would work with and put into office?
So some of the key ones would be, public transport. I think that's vital in terms of what the residents and ratepayers want, and that's what a lot of people are telling me. One of the big policy areas that we are working towards is planning and development. Wherever I go throughout Brisbane, people want to talk about development in their particular neck of the woods, and it can be a very thorny issue. One of the things that I've noticed that a lot of people are disenfranchised with is that for example, neighbourhood plans stipulate, and these are created at some cost. They stipulate, for example, that townhouses should be capped at 4 stories. And then the developer comes along and says to the council, well, I can't make any money out of the 4 stories. I need to go to 8. And so the council says, okay, you can go to 8, which is contrary to the neighbourhood plan. So what we've said is that, we really need to go back to the drawing board in regard to these things. And if the neighbourhood plan says 4, we need to stick to 4, regardless of what the developer says. So that's sort of a key issue. One of the other areas that I'm very enthusiastic about is environment. I think there's a whole lot of stuff that we can be doing as a council in the environment space. There's less green space in Brisbane than there is in Sydney and Melbourne. And for a city that is heading to a subtropical climate, I think that's a terrible shame. Singapore would be my template for cities these days, for buildings in the city these days. I don't know if you've ever been to Singapore, but they have these magnificent high-rises and apartments with all this greenery cascading down the side. Might cost a little bit more, might be a little bit more maintenance, but wow, what an impact it makes. So there's all those sorts of things, trying to make things more affordable for our ratepayers. For example, if you pay your rates on time for the full 4 quarters of the rate period, we'll give you $100 back. And that's around Christmas time. So, the council will be giving you about $260 back, which is handy if you need some extra eggnog or a present under the tree. So they're the sorts of key areas that we're looking at.
Okay. So I noticed obviously there's a difference between, I guess, the Lord Mayor's campaign and your current one. I noticed, though.
What's the difference?
Well, there's one thing that I noticed is that the Lord Mayor, certain policies for the Lord Mayor especially, seem to be very demographic focused, very specific. So there's half rates for first homeowners, off-peak travel free for seniors, reduced fees for small businesses. How do you plan to combat for those demographics that they are already strongly targeting with certain policies?
I'd be interested to know. Well, absolutely, and we're not going to change the seniors travel rules in any way, shape, or form. But we will unveil a suite of policies closer to the time, and I understand what they're doing. In terms of the areas and the demographics that they're targeting, and we've talked about previously. We're going to give free fares for cross river ferries, which I think is important. It's trying to get people out of their cars, that sort of thing. So we have already articulated some of our policy in that sort of area. But we have a campaign. We have a campaign plan that'll kick in a week or so. The big challenge at council level is getting voters to engage. Council has the lowest voter turnout of all 3 levels of government, and so the challenge for someone coming up against someone like me, flying solo, smell of an oily rag sort of campaign. The challenge for me is to against the Goliath that is the LNP. They've been in power for 16 years. They've got the LNP organisation behind them, plus the office of the Lord Mayor. So there's really that challenge of getting our message out. So we've got to be clever, and we've got to wait until people are engaged. Over the Christmas period, people are catching up with family and friends, and then, of course, you've got back to school, back to uni. So once all those sorts of things are settled and people have a bit more time on their hands, that's when we can start engaging with them.
Yeah. And I guess one thing that has been, I think, a criticism that's been put on your part, especially by the LNP, is there's been LNP leaders that have said in the past, or said with this election, that certain things from your past, especially with being a journalist, moments of immaturity, that you are too juvenile to be Lord Mayor. How would you speak to voters who are concerned possibly about your rapport in the office?
Not one person has said to me out in the street anything along those lines. The people that have made the complaints, so I was a political editor for 17 years, and not once did any of those gentlemen raise that as an issue. In fact, the managing director at Channel 7 at the time, Max Walters, is on the record as saying that never did anyone raise any issue about my behaviour. It would be more of a surprise if the LNP said that they were supporting Patrick Condren. You'd expect that a political opponent, desperate to shore up a political mate in Adrian Schrinner, would say those sorts of things. There's no examples. There's, I went to thousands and thousands and thousands of hours of press conferences with premiers, opposition leaders, ministers, backbenchers, members of the public, and there has not been one complaint lodged about or raised about my behaviour. I think it's pretty petty and pathetic on their part. One of the gentlemen that you allude to, didn't like me, doesn't like me because I stood up to him, because I didn't take everything that he said as gospel. And I asked the tough questions, and he's never gotten over that. He is a man that boasted in state parliament about sacking 20,000 public servants. I think that says more about his character than mine.
So that's an interesting thing with politics, is that now that obviously things come in, things become more relevant or more present. People coming and throwing out different attacks, that sort of thing.
And I think the punters are sick of it. It is clearly an attempt to smear me. I never engaged in that sort of reporting. I always based my reporting on facts. They have, and when you get to the smear level, I mean, that just goes to show that they've got nothing left. And it's disappointing. I don't think the punters out there are particularly interested in that sort of thing. And I have always said from day one, September 29, that I would play the politics, the policies, not the person. Now, the LNP have chosen not to do that. And as I say, that says more about them than it says about me.
Yeah. And I think for the last question I want to ask, and I think possibly... Last question.
Wow, righto.
Yeah.
You always save the best one for last.
Well, I thought this one would possibly be the most important one.
Righto.
So I know you've got an election to win, obviously, and you're trying to put that. But there's a lot of young people who... we're in a globalized world. There's people seem to be more cared about politics around the world, like what's happening with the states, what's happening with federal. There seems to be a more and more obliviousness when it comes to, if that's a word.
I'm just thinking obliviousness. I don't know if it is a word, but I'm going to start using it.
Well, hopefully that catch on. When it comes to local and maybe state to an extent. What do you think for young voters especially should they look out for when it comes to local politics, and I guess also broadly, everything else as well with politics?
Your observations are spot on. What I've noticed, particularly in the last 5 to 10 years, is that the reportage of federal politics has come down to a state level, and states come down to a council level, and council has dropped off. And the reality at council is that your rubbish bins are always going to be picked up. Someone will come out and fix your roads. You'll always have to pay rates. So there is that level of, absolutely, there's that level of disengagement among younger voters, which I think is a terrible, terrible shame. And I would urge everyone out there to get enrolled, get out and vote, make yourself aware of the issues that concern you. I think when it comes to students, they're obviously concerned about the climate, as I would be if I was a young person these days, because of the impact that climate change is going to have on their futures. And it's something I talk to my kids about. Finn obviously can't vote, but it's certainly something I talk to Maddie about. And when you see the devastating bushfires, and when you see, it's really interesting, the devastating bushfires in New South Wales. I saw a photo of a bushfire ravaged homestead that is now flooded. So I believe, I'm not telling anyone else to believe, but I'm a believer in climate change. I don't think we can do what we've done to the planet and it not have some impact.
Mm.
I'm not saying that you should believe it, but I certainly do. Um, so there's a lot of significant issues out there for young folk today. Um, and obviously public transport would be an issue. Job security would be an issue for young folk. And I got to tell you, I grew up in the '70s, and I would hate to be a young person today. Just all the sorts of stuff that you got to deal with, particularly via your mobile devices, um, and it could be a pretty bleak outlook out there. But make yourself aware of the issues that concern you. Become active if you need to. I've got a publicly available email. Feel free to send me an email if there's an issue that you are dealing that you want dealt with. But get out, get registered. You can't bitch about the government or the administration if you don't vote. If you're not prepared to get out and vote, you're stuck with what everyone else says you should be stuck with. But I'm optimistic. I think certainly that come March the 29th, if I'm lucky enough to be elected Lord Mayor, there'll be a whole range of things that the young folk out there will be embracing with gusto.
Okay, wonderful. That's great. I think definitely with having obviously I believe in global warming. Young person,
Yes.
I think it's overwhelmingly young people involved.
And I think calling it global warming gives it.
It's too much of it.
Well, it labels it in a specific
Yeah.
silo, and I think climate change is a much better way of describing it because you only have to look around, and David Attenborough, he describes that we're in serious trouble, and I'm going to believe the science. I'm not going to believe some bloke who has read a few articles on Facebook and has declared that there's no such thing as climate change. I think Brisbane should be a carbon neutral city. How we get there is a matter of debate. But I think again, it's one of those things that as a potential political leader that I can set an example of.
I guess touching on, I said it was going to be the last question, but since now we're
I
talking
used to
about
do that too. I'd say it's the last question, and we keep banging on you.
yeah, you talk about climate change. You already mentioned about more bike access, the ferry, and more green spaces. Is there any other things, especially with climate change and how much of an issue that a lot of people see it as? Is there any other things that you would want to try and push for to try and help with that?
Oh, absolutely. And it's again, it's one of those things that can you ever do too much when it comes to I nearly said global warming. When it comes to climate change, can you ever do too much? And I think people that say, well, we're only a small country, we're only contributing an insignificant amount to climate change. They're the same people that like to boast that Australia bats above its weight when it comes to sporting achievements, for example. So why can't we bat above our weight or punch above our weight, to use the proper cliche? Why can't we punch above our weight when it comes to setting the example with climate change? More solar on roofs. There's a whole suite of things that we could be doing to set an example and to make a real difference.
I'm actually curious now. We're sort of going on this.
I'm pleased I finally got your curiosity.
Trust me, I was curious about this since the start. But something that obviously is with your campaign is being part of very much like a working class, grassroots movement, essentially, with this Labor campaign. And there's been an issue, and this has sort of been a growing concern, especially from working class with climate change, is that when policies and such come into place, that'll often mean that manufacturing jobs, generally heavy unionized areas, become heavily impacted. Now, obviously with local there's a different impact versus like state and federal.
Mm.
But how would you speak to voters like that who are concerned for their livelihood, their career, that are very much centric into fossil fuels or in industrial areas that would be impacted to try and make a difference for climate change?
I'm of the firm view that unless we do something about climate change, there is no future. There is no future jobs for anyone, and that's the reality of it. And certainly the state government and I'm not necessarily aware what the federal government's doing, but there is opportunities available for people to segue out of those coal-dependent jobs. And when you hear that major trust funds, not trust funds, investment funds in the US have stopped investing in coal industries, that things are starting to change. And if you're smart, you'll sniff the wind of change, and you'll retool, reskill, and look for something else to do. But it is a scary time. Absolutely, it's a scary time. But I think if we don't change, I think the planet would be buggered.
Well, that at least
I don't want to sort of end on a pessimistic note, but you've got to be a realist as well. When all these warnings are coming from people who should know, we need to either pay attention or stick our heads in the sand. And of course, we know what happens if you stick your head in the sand.
Well, I guess we want to end
a sandy head.
That's the worst end. But I guess if we want to make this a bit brighter, what's your favorite food?
My favourite food.
Just so we don't end on this.
Yes. No.
Nihilistic, everything's going to destroy.
Crying in their beers. My favourite food, I think it varies from, week to week. Anything that Margaret cooks, anything that Maddie cooks.
That's a good answer.
Yes, exactly. I'm learning this political gig. But I'll eat anything. I won't eat tripe. You know what tripe is?
It's fish liver. Was it?
No. It's the lining,
the stomach.
The stomach lining of cow. So I'm not going to eat that.
That was really off.
That's true. That's but I won't eat that. But I'll eat most things. I think, and again, it's there's a fish and chip shop up at Deagon called Shelley's Inn that does the best battered flathead that I've ever had. There's an Asian inspired restaurant in the valley called Happy Boy, which does really, really good tucker. But I love a good Reuben as well. I've had the good fortune to travel to New York and have a Reuben there. But the local cafe down the road does a very, very good Reuben. So I think one of the joys of Brisbane is its multiculturalism. And for example, in Forest Lake ward, which is obviously in close proximity to where you blokes are, they've got 70 different cultures. And I'm going out there and working my way through all their cuisines. And I think, when I was growing up in Townsville, in North Queensland, fish and chips was considered exotic. And so, we've got Greek festivals and Italian festivals and German festivals in Brisbane these days. So, I'll eat anything that tastes good.
So I guess that's where we'll wrap it up today.
Sure.
So for those who you want to reach out to, those who are listening, what would you like to tell? What's your final, I guess, call to action, your final call to arms, I guess, with this all?
Yes. If you want to stop the rorts, if you want to stop the LNP lining their pockets with your money, vote for Pat Condren. They've been in power now for 16 years. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. If they get another 4 years, they'll be in power for 20 years. And that will be the longest serving administration since Joe Bjelke-Petersen. Now, you and your listeners are too young to remember the Joe eras, but they didn't end well. And I think it's time for a change. I think it's time to get someone in there who isn't a politician, who is a political clean skin, who is prepared to make the tough decisions, and who is concerned about their community. So I think, and of course, I found out during the week that the Speaker of the South Australian Parliament, where Cooper's beer is made, has Coopers on tap in his office. So I'm thinking that could be something I could do.
That's a good deal. That's a
I'll take it under advisement anyway.
yeah, but you're going to get 4X
Yeah.
instead, so I don't know if that'll be better.
So if you vote for me, you're going to get an honest bloke who's not a career politician, who has the residents' interests at heart, and will get in, roll his sleeves up, and get the job done, and then he'll get out. He'll get out of your hair.
Well, thank you very much.
Do you live in Brisbane?
Yes,
You're eligible to vote.
Yes, of
Will
course.
you be voting for me?
Well, I've still got to talk to the LNP Lord Mayor, so he might tell me that Labor's the one with the rorts as well. You know?
Well, there's no rorts in our system. We haven't been in power for 16 years. But I would just say, in closing, Ryan, thank you very much for having me out.
Well, thank you for coming out.
It's you don't get an opportunity like this ever these days, and I really enjoy, as I say, I really enjoy being on the wireless, as us old blokes call it, and I think it's terrific what you're doing out here, and it's a terrific experience, and it's terrific to see young people still involved in radio broadcasting. So all the best to you and your listeners, and thanks for having me.
Well, thank you very much. This is Red Suit Interviews. Make sure to go, if you want to support the Labor's campaign, go to their social medias. If you're watching on YouTube.
During a couple of weeks ago, I was called a meme lord.
A meme lord?
I don't know what that is, but I'm going to take it.
Well, yeah, if you're watching on YouTube, make sure to go down to the links below, support them if you want to, and hopefully we'll be able to get an interview with the Lord Mayor, who is the current LNP administration. So thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you next time.